We felt it was important to do this particular session because research as a term and evidence-based decision making as a phrase can carry a lot of baggage and may actually present barriers in themselves before you even get to the point where you're talking about the nuts and bolts of what research and evidence actually is. So before we do any sort of digging into those processes and tools and methods that you might use in conducting research or gathering evidence, we need to establish exactly what it is we're aiming for and what it is we're talking about, particularly when we're considering research about health and well-being at its core. And of course, we've got the slide on the screen there, which is a slide we'll incorporate into every session, gives a background to the HDRC. And links to where these research sessions are coming from. And you can see, you know, the broad remit there that we're talking about, even though everything is focused on health and well-being. So I hope that's all right with everybody. I hope everybody's here for the same reason. So brief reflection back on what we've done before. We looked at the relationship between research and you as a potential researcher. We acknowledge the fact that actually research is everywhere. It's everywhere that you look. It's in our smartphones. Data analytics is so huge now. You're engaging in research all of the time, whether you acknowledge that or not. And actually, it's not that much of a departure, probably, but from what you do day to day in the workplace and out of the workplace, we kind of can't escape it at the moment. The funny thing is, we looked at the relationship between research and you before, in name only, defining what research is. We actually did it a little bit as part of that process, and we talked about curiosity in particular as sort of the initial part of that evidence gathering and research process. And we looked at whether curiosity is a cruel frustration or a happy anticipation, and the deciding factor on whether it's one of those things is time. And we acknowledge that, you know, that there is that barrier to engaging in something new around what you do day to day. We did look at what research is not, and we'll come back to that a little bit later on in this session. And we had a bit of a chat in the first session about what you thought research was, and there was feedback around it being about a robust and systematic process, and that arguments made needed to be credible, and that it might be about the generation of new knowledge, but it doesn't always have to be. We've established that research exists in lots of forms and lots of different scales, and of course data is a central part of our lives now. And arguably, we've got a lot more control over things than ever, research-wise and evidence-wise, but certainly we've got a much greater awareness of what research is, what collecting it involves, and what is actually supposed to be done with it. We looked at types and purposes of research, and all of this is sort of leads into this particular session, and we'll do a little bit of back and forth before we move on to the next session, which is more about health-focused evidence and what that means for us. But just to say at this point, there's a very circular thing happening behind what we're talking about. You know, we've acknowledged that time might be a barrier to you conducting your own research or gathering evidence to base your decisions on, but that could actually be something that you solve through research, and everything comes full circle through the HDRC and the way that it aims to. It's integrating research in every way across the local authorities. We're as much developing training and support around that as we are actually doing research about that process and its outcomes. So we're discovering stuff together all of the time, and that's why I was referring to this as more of a collaborative thing than actual training. So aims for this session, it's mainly about so what is research, but in terms of how we see it, and the terms we attach to it, what its purpose is. Curiosity is a great term, and we will revisit that. It avoids that baggage that I've just mentioned. But we have to remember it's not just finding stuff out and being curious that matters in terms of evidence-based decision making. It's what we do with that knowledge. And ultimately, we want to understand things, we want to explain things, and we want to be able to solve problems as well. Bearing that in mind, we'll look at some of the associations and the myths surrounding research and show that it comes in many forms. You don't ever get two pieces of research that are alike, and no one piece of research is perfect either. We'll look at how research might be influenced by us and by what we think and our previous experiences, and how you can hone your critical eye in on that. We'll look at decision making right at the beginning of research, the basics of process, forming an argument, and moving through from initial thoughts about things, about problems, everyday stuff that you might like to change or learn more about, moving from that through to actually finding a researchable question. And this session is very interactive. So I'm gonna seem like I'm talking really fast. Please tell me if it's too fast. Just shout up anybody at any time with any questions or anything that isn't clear. I suppose I'm just trying to rattle through my bits because the interactive bits are the most important. So annoyingly, I've just been spending the last 10 minutes, for those of you who caught me before the session started, trying to upload a very short questionnaire. And it hasn't worked. It's the simplest thing on Teams where you just attach a document, and for some reason it is not having it today. Before I try and do that again, take a few minutes individually and just have a think about what your top challenges are at work. I've put 3 on there. Please do write them down. Just for yourselves. Don't necessarily think about the scale of what the problem is or what the issue is or the challenge, however you want to think about it. Don't think about how many people are affected or, the economic impact. Don't think about scale in that way. Do think about how strongly you feel about that particular problem. What is it that really frustrates you? Either about what it is you're trying to achieve or the way that you're trying to achieve it. And there's no need to share any of this. We will come back to it at the end. And of course, there's opportunities to talk to us and talk to other members in the HDRC about developing your ideas framed around these problems into possible research. But at this point, there's no need to share. So just take a couple of minutes, which will hopefully be timed nicely for this document to attach, to think about what are your main challenges at work. Okay. Okay. So hopefully, I don't know how that worked because I've just tried it every which way I've known how to. But I added a link in there, and for some reason that has worked. The more techie of you than me will know why that's the case. So taking those challenges that you've just noted down, I also want you to have a look at the questionnaire that I've just put in the chat, which is around choices and values and characteristics. And this will take you a few minutes, but try and do it quite quickly. So, oh, is it really? Thank you, RC. That's so annoying. It's asking for a Teesside Uni email address. Great. I don't understand because I've taken all the access and permissions out of everything and it's not having it. Okay, plan B. Let's share the other screen that this is opening. Forgive me, everybody. Okay, so I'm hoping you can see that okay, which is the choices and values. What's important to me? Just shout up if there's any problems with seeing that. So take a few minutes again. Think about the meaning of these items listed below. And I know you can't actually download this yourself, but I'll make it available to you somehow after the session. If you can, make a note of the 5 items that are important to you. Just make a note of the numbers. So have a look through this list of 40 things. Identify 5 of those that are really important to you. Step 1. And do remember, this is just for you. This isn't for sharing or anything like that. It's about reflecting on your development as a researcher and your influence as a researcher as well. Okay, so hopefully you've noted down a few, up to 5 of those items that have jumped out as really important to you. Things that you would live by, real values that you live by every day. So the next stage of this is to note the numbers, which you already have, but you would have done it on the paper if I'd been able to share it. The next stage is to look at this table you can see on screen, on page 2, sorry. And you can see that the numbers correspond to particular characteristics. So from your numbers, have a look at the corresponding characteristics, and hopefully you'll have several numbers that will subscribe to a particular set of characteristics. And if you're able to, note those down. And remember, this is just for you. Okay. So I will need to switch back just because I'm sharing particular windows. Apologies if you haven't had time to go through that, but hopefully you've got a bit of an idea of where we're getting with values and characteristics. So, give me 2 seconds. Okay, that should be the clunkiest bit, just to reassure you. That's the only bit where I was hoping to share a particular file that I was hoping you could complete. So, if you think about your values, they show up again and again in all your actions, in all your motivations for actually doing things, the decisions that you make between particular courses of action, but also They link to how you perceive challenges and how you perceive problems. So if you go back to those original top 3, or even if you got 1 or 2 down, those challenges that you originally identified in the workplace, they will not only tell you about the workplace that you're in, and they won't only just tell you about the role that you're in, they'll tell you about you. And of course, everybody carries this frame of reference through which they see things and perceive things, and that might be influenced by your current state. You might be hungry, tired, annoyed, whatever it might be. They'll be influenced by your past experiences. They'll be influenced by other people that you care about, or perhaps that you don't care about. They'll be influenced by what you want to achieve on a day-to-day basis and overall, and what your role expects you to achieve. And it's not always easy to see that frame of reference and see where those things are coming from. It might be really obvious now that you're seeing those particular values and characteristics in front of you and you identify with them, but your values will be connected to the problems you identified in some way back at the beginning before you did that. So it would be good to just take some time after this session to sort of look at the connections between those things. It's not something you need to share, as I said, but is there anybody who would be happy to share anything? I'm just offering it out there. There will be opportunities later on, don't worry. Okay, so looking at some actual research then. I don't know if anybody is already aware of these particular studies. I didn't realize that there was a film about the Stanford Prison Experiment, but it's an incredibly famous study. Basically, we're looking at the way that people act, the way that they perceive things, and what we like to do. We like to subscribe to familiar things. And if 70s psychological research tells us anything, it's that we like to conform to what's expected, and we quite like to assimilate roles as well. When we're looking at what research actually is and how we can change things, we're stepping outside of that everyday expectation and those everyday responsibilities. And that can seem daunting, but actually, there's a whole load of processes and principles there to lean on to guide you to conduct research. And research absolutely doesn't have to be on this level. We've got there a study that is on the left. That's the study that's referring to the Milgram experiment, which is quite famous that you might be aware of, which looks at conformity and how we essentially, as human beings, the argument being, I should say, that we as human beings are good at being told what to do, and that we like to conform and we tend to do what's expected a lot of the time. And that was a very extreme example of a psychological experiment that had issues, which I'll come back to in a second. And the Stanford Prison Experiment, which some of you might be much more aware of, was conducted by Zimbardo many years ago. Again, another extreme example of a psychological experiment that had issues. And that was about people being given a role and playing up to that role, playing into that role wholeheartedly, whether there was a risk involved or not. And there's a suggestion that as human beings, we like to do that. I suppose going into research and evidence-based decision making might be something that you're not used to when you're stepping outside of your comfort zone, but there is a lot there to guide you, including the HDRC, but there's a lot of process and principles around research for you to lean on. It's not the only reason I've brought out these particularly famous studies. It's because while these studies are famous and they underpin a lot of what we know about ourselves as individuals and as to how we react and engage in society, they're also quite questionable as research. You could actually say that given their issues, their challenges, they don't constitute research. They're not reliable, they're not credible, and they're not valid, even though they're very famous and we did learn a lot from them. So research isn't always about scientific experimentation and testing and controlled conditions, as you would see in these particular examples. It's not always about causing a huge debate. It's not always about being in the public eye or doing something really high stakes just to prove an argument. And it's certainly not about doing something where the means justify the ends. A lot of it, what we learn, is about the process, and sometimes we don't even get to the end and answer the question that we thought we wanted to answer. Um, yes, we did learn a lot from research like this, but also a lot of people were hugely negatively affected by it. So, did the ends justify the means? Does that mean it's good research? That's very questionable. So these pieces of research in particular were very unethical in the way things were administered. Now there's so much guidance and support to ensure that things like this isn't, it just doesn't happen, and it's certainly not expected. But on top of that, these things were questionable in other ways. They also had really limited samples of people engaging in them, which we know you need to be able to generalize to wider communities where you can, particularly when you're making bold statements about how humans think and act. They've been criticized because of their artificiality, their experiments. They were done in particular situations which aren't reflective of the real world. We we know that their participants were given limited information to make the experiments work. So not only were they unethical in that sense, some of them were possibly given incorrect information and they might not have acted naturally as they would in normal settings. Also, they've been criticized because the researchers were biased and because some of the participants apparently were aware of the expectations of the study. So they might have played up to that because that's what they were expected to do and it was very conscious. So essentially, while research might require certain commitments and conditions and qualities from you, it does not have to be this to be valuable and credible. It just needs to be something that is more than just collecting facts and information. It needs a purpose. Research can't be just reassembling and reordering facts or information without interpretation, and it shouldn't really be something to just get your ideas noticed. What we're looking at is research and evidence-based decision making, gathering evidence that has a clear purpose. You need a clear purpose for what you're doing. You need to interpret these findings appropriately, and where the respect comes from is credibility around that. We want to solve problems, we want to support people, we want to improve things and create new things. And this is how we do it in an evidence-based way. So just some myths around research to bust very openly. Research is about true science. Well, what is true science? I mean, we can question that phrase in itself. But if we're talking about research just being about facts and figures, experiments, controlled conditions, that's definitely not strictly true. And later on, we'll have a look at examples where that's not the case. It's time and resource intensive. There are loads of ways where you can build in evidence-based decision making and research into your everyday work. Research must create new knowledge. No, not necessarily. You do need to do something new with the knowledge that you're collecting, but we are absolutely working from the foundations of what's gone before. It doesn't mean that you have to create some brand spanking new idea that nobody's ever thought of. It's about finding answers. Well, actually, as I just said before, it's not necessarily about finding the answer to a question. Sometimes the value is in the process of going through the research and you come out with something that you really weren't expecting, but it's far more valuable. And the myth around research being for those in senior roles, definitely not. It's for absolutely everybody, and that's a key driver behind the HDRC, and our role as partners in that is to encourage absolutely everybody, no matter what your role is, to see the value of research and evidence in what you do, no matter what that is. So, decision making then. We are focusing here just on stage one of this 7-step decision making process that research can fall into. But all the other decisions in planning and in that research process are based on that definition of the problem or the opportunity. Identifying a solid and focused area for research is absolutely essential, but then creating a design that's linked to that will mean that you collect data to answer a research question and it's all based upon judgment. You will make many decisions along the way, so who to talk to, how many people to talk to, how to ask particular questions, how to write questions. And these are all decisions based upon evidence about what works best and for who and in what situation. It's only by making sure that you've got the critical eye on yourself in terms of those values and characteristics we just looked at, and anyone else involved in your area of interest, that you can really make sure that you've got the diligence needed to design and conduct a piece of appropriate research and collect credible evidence. So we're focusing on the early bit of the process here. I'm sure you could all see what I'm getting at with this one. I had the luxury of being a teenager in the 90s, when there weren't any photographs being taken, there weren't any smartphones at the ready, didn't have to worry about social media. The 90s, there was many memories, but not much evidence. Absolutely everyone has anecdotes, experiences, memories, and we all make decisions based on those as and when they come to mind. But that's extremely limited, of course, and we need to start stepping outside of that to start research and making truly evidence-based decisions. Your decisions are only as good as the evidence that they're based on. Bear that in mind. And we're talking about that early stage, moving from thought to idea to question, which requires developing an argument. Even before we get to the research design stage, moving through that process requires building evidence from the knowledge we gain through initial curiosity. So you might be looking at a particular issue, those challenges you identified earlier, a particular issue, identifying the problem. So you're moving from a thought to an idea, and then you choose a particular solution that you might want to test. And that is the researchable question that you'll frame from that. You might move from a thought about a practical experience to an idea that is supported by literature to a researchable question coming from something that's validated from initial reading that you've done. So it's moving through that process, but there are stages to help you with that. Forming an argument has three key elements. You've got your claim, your point and or your conclusion that you've reached. You've got your evidence. Why do you claim that particular thing? Is it due to data that you've seen, facts, statistics, or experiences? And then you've got your reason in pulling it all together. Why do you think the evidence explains or supports that particular claim? So we'll look at a couple of practical examples. So, yes, this is a slightly crude example to start off with, but it is, after all, actually a reminder of the fact that we make unconscious decisions day after day, which can have implications that we don't even register, either for what we don't think about as options or what we do, how we feel, and how we see things. So with this one, I'm starving, missed breakfast again. What did you have? Weetabix, always have done since I was a kid. My mum had them when she was little and she always said they were really good for you, kept her bouncing. It's all the milk and the fibre and that. The claim in there is Weetabix is good for you. The evidence? Mum did well on them because of the nutritional value. Reasoning, mums are rarely wrong, so I had decided to have Weetabix for breakfast. I mean, you can see the slight flaws in the reasoning there, and the evidence. Yes, this isn't, I know this isn't a workplace example, but if we consider something like organizational culture at work, the way that we do things at work every day, there is so much written about that. We do the same things that we've always done, not really questioning them. We also rationalize things to suit our own preferences. We're quite resistant to change as humans. We know the traps that we all fall into as well. And sometimes we just keep falling into them. So yes, there are genuine limitations that stop us from changing things. Of course they exist, but a lot of it is about how our brains work and they reinforce what's familiar and what's comfortable. Um, and we're really good at creating reasoning that makes things easier for ourselves, I suppose. Not with that as an intention, but it does get in the way as a bit of a barrier. The interesting thing about this is an example of a flawed argument is that the actual evidence is in there. It's just not quite fleshed out. So it's not seen as the important thing to base a decision on. The reasoning really is that mums are rarely wrong. We could be looking further into the reasoning there around the milk and the fibre or whatever it is that could be a scientific basis for making an evidence-based decision. So the next one is for you. I'm going to stop talking. There's another example, but it's much more informed. So, I hear you're getting ready for the charm bracelet marathon at Redcar. Yep, I've started doing that high intensity interval training because I've heard it's better than just jogging all the time. I read some research papers by sports scientists and they've shown it's better for switching on the physiological bits and bobs that I need. What do we think about the claim, about the evidence, and about the reasoning? Can you spot the claim? Nobody wants to venture yet. Oh, I've just seen Rachel saying really good film. Catherine said, yep, HIIT is more effective. Claim is the HIIT training. Okay. So, yep, better than jogging. How about the evidence? I'm going to keep an eye
reading
on
the papers?
chat. Yes. And then the reasoning. I am a runner and the science says that this is what I need. So this sounds like a pretty sound argument based on some evidence. Has anybody got any issues with that? And just in case I upset anybody, does anybody really subscribe to HIIT training? Fingers crossed. So I have it on good authority from an actual person with a doctorate in sports science that there's a lot of issues with this, even though there's a massive industry built out there built on it. So there's lots of TV exposure, there's celebrity endorsements, there's classes around the corner every 5 minutes on HIIT training. So why isn't it a good idea? There's quite a few counter arguments to this. And there's a really key phrase in there. I don't know if anybody spotted it, but I read some research papers. That's slightly tricky. So this sort of argument can be just as risky as the first one about the Weetabix, really. A bit of evidence can be just as risky as having none, really. There are papers out there to show that HIIT can offer health and lifestyle benefits to lots of people. But it's who those people are that evidence is based on we need to be a bit concerned about. There's also just as much evidence out there to show the complete opposite, that it doesn't have any benefits. There's people that argue it releases too much cortisol into your system and puts your body into high stress levels for too long, so that it's actually counterproductive long term. It was actually designed and tested around elite athletes. Most of us don't fit into that category. I certainly don't. So it hasn't been fully tested in terms of the benefits for your regular people. And arguably just the messaging that you can condense 90 minutes of exercise that's recommended into 90 seconds. The messaging around that is that you don't want to do 90 minutes because exercise is a chore, and it's reinforcing that. And lots of academics argue that actually messaging wise, that's counterproductive as well. People just won't keep it up longer term. So I know these aren't strictly workplace examples and they might not be directly transferable to the type of things that you're doing in the local authority and with local communities, for local communities. But you can see how this type of reasoning could apply to what you're thinking. Have a think back to those challenges you listed back at the start of the session and consider where those ways of working or those situations originally came from. Somebody somewhere created those situations and those ways of working from a seemingly positive place, but they were based on their values and their perceptions and their influence. Unpicking that and starting to really think about what the reasoning is and what the evidence is that things are the right way to do things, that's part of good research. Okay, so this is the fun bit where I really am going to shut up. So let's have a look at your decision making. I'm going to test breakout rooms in Teams, which I'm very nervous about after that file episode earlier, so do bear with me. And I'm going to split you off into teams to do this one. You might have dealt with a similar task in the past, but this task has a lot of different purposes, and I'm hoping you'll never have come across this research-wise. So, the scenario is, you were on a small plane flying from Australia to the west coast of Peru. Suddenly, the plane wing fell off and you have crash landed on a remote, uninhabited tropical island east of Tonga. Before I go any further, anybody want to stick their hand up if they've been to Tonga? Do a quick thumbs up if you've been anywhere near it. We're good. Okay. You might have extra insider knowledge, that's all. So your plane is on fire, but you have 5 minutes to rescue 3 pieces of kit from the wreckage. What do you grab? What else did I write down? I was writing down practically everything you said because it was great. So had utilising what you already had, I think was it Shehzad was saying what would be on the island and being resourceful. We need to think about that when we're looking at evidence-based decision making as well. You don't necessarily have to come up with something new, something fantastic. Think about what's already there. Not worrying too much about that. However, it is important to think about where you are. So, Haley, was it you who said you'd been to Vegas? Who said they'd been to Vegas and they were going to have the beer?
That's me.
Right, Ruth. So, please don't kill me, everyone, but Ruth is onto something because it absolutely matters where you are. Tonga, I mean, I've used this exercise for a couple of different purposes. You can look at it through the lens of leadership. You can look at it in terms of teamwork and decision making, but I've never actually used it in this way. It's really important to think about the process that you went through, obviously, and how you each presented your evidence to make an argument for selecting particular things and make a case for one item or another. And that's where the real value is. But please don't kill me. There is actually a right answer to this, and it's really simple. And it is the beer. It's not a trick question as such, but if you had the right information in front of you, you would know that Tonga is actually in the top 10 shipping routes of the world. So basically, all you have to do is sit on a beach for 10 minutes and somebody's going to see you and rescue you. So you might as well have a good time while you're doing it. I didn't pick a place where it was in the top 5 shipping routes because I thought if I say the Suez Canal, people are just going to go, well. But there you go. It's all about where you are and the context. I'll come back to that in a second. So basically, yes, there you go, Ruth. This one's for you. And Haley, actually, because Haley said that in the end, didn't you? You might want the radio on. You might decide you want to pick the radio at the same time. Bit of newspaper, whatever it might be. Have a fire. You've already got a fire going, haven't you? So the decisions we make are only as good as the knowledge that you actually have, and it's on us to seek out that knowledge really and seek out the credible knowledge. So it's not just about the evidence that we're creating, it's about what we find in the first place. So we want facts, we want information that gives us the reason to believe that something is true. And that comes in many, many, many different forms. We've got a range of purposes and strategic aims that we looked at last time, but underneath that, it needs an appropriate form. We've got empirical research, which is based on scientific evidence. So that's data collected by someone through a systematic process with a clear purpose. It's got clear expectations around it and guidelines on who or where we collect that from. And of course, what we do with it to draw appropriate conclusions. But we've also got the anecdotal side, and I don't want to reduce the value around that because it's incredibly important for creating curiosity and for getting you started on something. You know, anecdotes, testimonials, case studies, they wouldn't be considered as research or credible evidence on their own, but if they're part of a bigger investigation or they're linked up to something else that is credible, then absolutely they're part of a package. And we know how powerful case studies can be in communicating the value of something that we're doing to people. If we pull these things together and we analyze them in a methodical way, we combine them with types of evidence, or we at least look at them alongside other types of evidence and see where there's connections, then the anecdotal stuff can absolutely become empirical and it can have value. If we're talking about credible evidence and forming an argument, it needs to be more than something just reported by an individual, essentially. But that can be a really important kickstarter for research as well. So don't dismiss it if you're looking at a testimonial about something, or a service user has told you a particular experience they've had, or a story even that's secondhand from them. Look into it, look at where the evidence might be that that is the case. And even if it isn't the case for lots of people, it might just be the case for a select group of people, and that's enough to justify looking into it more. So it's where you look and where you don't look beyond those testimonials that starts to create evidence-based decision making and research. And as we've seen, Tonga context is absolutely key. But at the same time, there's so much written about, well, everything basically. Academic research is just bursting with stuff about what motivates people to do these things, what barriers and challenges stop people from doing particular things in our communities or choosing courses of action. What isn't out there is the local authority perspective. You guys have a really unique perspective on things and a really unique position from which to argue a case that, you know, communities need things in a particular way, or they experience things in a particular way, or the way that you work should be different. So if there's something quite unique to local authorities and public sector that you want to argue in your research idea, then go for it. We can look at that together and see if we can create a feasible, researchable question. I've put Tonga and Teesside, Middlesbrough, Redcar. You know, we're a really unique place. What really staggered me when I moved down here, started working in an environmental charity, it was the diversity of the landscapes that we've got apart from anything, not just the communities. I mean, we've got coast, we've got wetland, we've got woodland, we've got marshland, we've got grassland, we've got it all, like, compared to other places in the UK and even other places internationally. And all of the communities around that and the way that they engage with those places, the services and the organizations in those places, and you working for those organizations, all of that is quite unique. So I suppose what I'm saying is that if you have a thought and you do your initial research to try and turn that into an idea, and you think, okay, I'm looking into the motivation of local visitors to Redcar as a tourist destination. Just because there's lots written out there about tourist motivation doesn't mean that your idea is redundant. The fact that people are coming to visit Redcar or Middlesbrough or whatever attraction it is that you're thinking about looking into, that's what's unique about it. So there's always something unique. You just need to be able to form a good argument around it, essentially. Okay, 2 minutes.